Good evening, welcome to Christchurch in the evening live. Welcome to those who are here, welcome to those at home on YouTube. Remember, we're going to start on YouTube, we'll do the sermon, then we're going to jump to Zoom for questions, discussions. We'll have people actually in the room here asking questions tonight and live from home as well, so we'll work that out. But let me start by praying, then we'll have a little reading, and then we're going to do some thinking about work in the book of Proverbs. So let me pray. Father God, we thank you for your word. We thank you that it relates to all of life, that it relates not just to how we are saved, how we are made right with you, as we are thinking about this morning, but how we then live our lives as those who are your people, as those who are called by you. And so, Father, we pray for your help now. Give us ears to hear and hearts that are soft, wanting to obey and do what is right. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I'm going to cause a little bit of confusion because we are going to be in Proverbs, but we're going to read Colossians 3. And we're going to read Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 through to chapter 4, verse 1. And then we're going to look at three particular Proverbs tonight, and I'll mention them and read them as we get to them in the talk, as it were. So Colossians chapter 3. And Paul writes, and he's writing to those who have been made alive in Christ. It's really important. This is to those who are believers, those who are setting their minds on things above, where Christ is seated at the right hand, he's written in verses 1 and 2. And then he writes verses 22, he says, "Slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything, and do it not only when their eye is on you and to curry their favor, but with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. Anyone who does wrong will be repaid for their wrongs, and there is no favoritism. Masters, provide your slaves with what is right and fair, because you know that you also have a master in heaven." We're going to be thinking a bit about those verses in a minute. But you now want to be turning back to Proverbs. And Proverbs 14, verse 23 will be the first proverb we'll look at in just a moment. Just let you turn there so you're ready when we get there in a minute. If, like most people, you spend a significant portion of every week of your life at your job, whether it's paid or unpaid, you'll also spend quite a lot of time thinking about your job. What do I need to do next? How do I maximize profit? How do I solve that problem? How do I resolve a conflict with that customer, that colleague? How do I encourage the children and teach them? And maybe you think at times about the meaning of it all. Why am I doing this? What's the purpose of it? Do I want to keep doing it? How is this job affecting me and my family? And yet, considering this takes up a significant part of our lives, often for Christian, it operates in a parallel world to our faith. So over here we have work, and then over here we have faith and church and life. Maybe some of the people at work know that you're a Christian and go to church, but you never stop to think, what does the Bible say? How am I, as a Christian, to think about work and behave at work? Or if you have, it often stops or limits at, it's just my mission field. But how does my work fit with God's intentions for my life? Is my work shaping my character in a godly direction? How do I work not just as a way to put food on the table, but as a sold-out disciple of Jesus? What's the point of work anyway in a Christian life? Is there any meaning to it beyond providing goods and services, making money, and providing a living for myself and my family? In the book of Proverbs, there are about 150 proverbs that relate to this area of work and laboring and wealth. And we're going to look at just a few of them tonight to help us think Christianly about work. And the first one is Proverbs 14, verse 23. And Solomon writes, "All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. All hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. That's the first point. Then the first thing we're seeing tonight, that all hard work is profit. All hard work brings a profit, brings reward, brings benefit. We'll think about the rewards later, but note now how Solomon states all hard work. That is, there's an inherent goodness in work. Now, when Solomon says all hard work, remember this is written to those who are fearing the Lord and choosing wisdom. So the hard work must fit with fearing God. It's a work that will glorify Him, a work that will bring Him honor. It's a work that will uphold His law, His standards. In other words, it's not illegal. It's not something like prostitution. It doesn't go against God's law, something maybe like the gambling industry. And it's ultimately motivated by love of God and neighbor, as we'll see. So any work that fits that is a good work. So whether your work is as a teacher or a banker or a tax inspector or a data inputter, a web designer, a gardener, insurance salesman or a street sweeper or a pastor, all hard work brings profit, brings a reward. There's a goodness, a benefit. It has inherent value. Now the reason Solomon can say that is because the one who fears the Lord understands that work is of the Creator. It reflects Him. We're made to work. You go back to Genesis 1 and 2, and immediately Adam and Eve placed in the garden to work it, to tend it. And we reflect our Maker in that. Pattern of creation was that of work for 6 days and rest for 1 day. The Lord both works and rests. We reflect Him. When the Lord Jesus Himself lived amongst us, before He changed labors to preach and teach, He worked with His hands up to the age of 30, giving further dignity and value and honor to work, particularly to work with hands. They're so often demeaned and belittled in our culture. Work's a good thing. It's of God. All hard work is profit. So our work matters. But the fall has tarnished work. Rebellion led God to curse the ground. As a result, work became toil and frustration, thorns and thistles blight human labor. Sin mars all our activity. Since Babel, all communication is fraught with misunderstanding. Even the best jobs have jarring and painful moments. There's a sense we work to live, to just survive. And the two big sins that arise from work are idolatry and idleness. Idolatry, it becomes all about the profit, what I gain from work, so much so that I root my identity in my work. My work shapes who I am. I identify myself by my work. I live to work. So much so that people might say I'm a workaholic. Work comes before God. It comes before my family. It's what I worship. Sometimes that's driven by another idol, money and wealth, but often the idol is the work itself. I love it so much, it defines me. The other sin at the other end is idleness. That's what Solomon says in the Proverbs. Mere talk leads only to poverty. And idleness comes in many guises. In its most obvious, it's laziness, not working at all, even though I physically can and able to, or just doing the bare minimum to get along, punching the timesheet. But for believers, idleness can be seen in our thinking, in our attitude. Work has just become a means to an end, a place to serve our own needs. I'm in it for the money and the things money can buy. Sometimes comes with a veneer of spirituality. I work to give to the church, but it's idle because work is limited to what I can get out of it. You don't care about the work itself, and you ignore the fact that God has purposes for us in our work. Our jobs are more than just a means to an end. We might become frustrated by our work. That then infects our hearts with a bitterness and an anger. And again, we stop seeing the purposes God has for our work. So we don't really care for the work. We have no interest in it. The result is it becomes divorced from our discipleship. and we become idle in serving God in that space. Work just becomes mere talk, emptiness. And it leads not just to a literal poverty, but also to a spiritual poverty. So how do we redeem work as those who are believers? How are we to think rightly about work? Well, turn with me to our next Proverbs, Proverb 22 and verse 29. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 29. Solomon writes here, do you see someone skilled in their work? They will serve before kings. They will not serve before officials of low rank. So secondly then, all work is for the king. All work is for the king. See, in Solomon's age, someone who was skilled, who was good at their work, who had worked hard to develop and hone their skills, ended up serving the king. Not the officials of low rank, but the king themselves. That is, you became so good that your work was valued and given the highest honor to serve the king with your skills, whether that was as a craftsman or a chef or as a soldier. And Paul picks up a similar idea in Colossians 3:23, in those verses we read right at the beginning. When Paul's speaking to slaves about working, he says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as your reward. It's the Lord Christ you are serving. Now we recognize for us as believers that this is how we're to think about of our work. And it's striking that for us, we automatically have the privilege of serving the King with our work because of our salvation. We're redeemed, we're forgiven, we're made Christ's, and such now all that we do for King Jesus. We haven't maybe got to the best of our profession, we may not be the best craftsman or the best chef, but because we're saved, we serve the King. All work is for the King. Now that invests my work with a purpose and a meaning, whatever that is, whether it's paid or unpaid, whether I'm a banker or a cleaner or a stay-at-home mum. It invests it with purpose because I serve the King of the universe. So it's not random and meaningless work, it's work for the King. More than that, it's the King who rules, and therefore it is He who has placed me there. This is the area that Jesus has called me to. See, often we speak of call only with regard to pastors and missionaries, but all of us are called to a place of work and service. So the work you do is the place where King Jesus has called you to serve him. It's not some random accident that you are there. You're there because Jesus has placed you. He's called you. And it may be for a short season, it may be for a long season, but it seems to me we stay there until there's a good reason to move. That is, until Jesus calls us to another work. And knowing I serve the King, that this is where he has called me, changes everything. Now you might be thinking, oh no, he can't have called me. I hate my job. But if this is the area where Jesus has called me and I serve the King, this is also the area of discipleship. This is the area where I live out my Christian life, where I seek to love God and love neighbors. This is where I learn how to do that better as a disciple of Jesus. And now my job becomes more than the job I hate. See, if I'm seeking to love God, love Jesus in my work, serving him as King, then a number of things will happen. Firstly, loving Jesus will mean working hard where he's placed me, not in order to earn more money, or to impress my employer, or to ensure I keep my job and don't get fired. The external motives have been replaced with internal motives. I work hard because I work for King Jesus. It will mean that I will ensure that I develop and hone my skills to do it as best as I can within who he has made me to be. I'm serving Jesus. I love him. You don't give hard-hearted, not care when you serve or do something for the one you love. If I'm doing my work for King Jesus, it now becomes part of my worship. What does worship in the workplace look like? Well, it might involve singing praise tunes as I work. Nothing wrong with that, as long as you're doing that within COVID-19 guidelines. But biblical worship is more than just singing. To worship is to give God honor that he deserves. To obeying God in every task you perform. Knowing that when you do that task with all your heart, you're pleasing God. And your desire and work is not about getting more or getting the money so you can go on holiday, or about power or fame or accruing comfort. You desire to please Jesus and make much of him. Work is not what you worship, Jesus is. And in your work, how you do your work brings him worship and honor. Which means you'll find yourself learning about him and seeing his work and enjoying his presence in your job. When you see creativity, you'll revel in it as a reflection of the great creator of the universe. When your boss does a good job of leading, you'll rejoice in that as a good gift from the king. When your boss does not do a good job, you rejoice that the king of the universe is greater than him. When you see justice prevail, when you help a client get the best price or the best product, you rejoice, you worship, serving King Jesus wholeheartedly in all that you do. And in turn, you love your neighbor. And of course, that begins with loving colleagues well, even those who are difficult. And you're not just loving them to get ahead or to get something out of them or to use them. You love them simply because you want to do good to others, as Jesus calls you to as his disciple. And you're able to because you serve King Jesus, and he has given you everything you need. You don't need it from them. So you can love them without an agenda. And loving neighbors will involve loving clients and loving those you serve and loving customers. But to really grasp this, you need to see how every job loves someone. To see how your small part, as it were, plays in the bigger part, how it helps develop human society. If you're the shelf stacker at Sainsbury's, you're part of a much larger chain that starts with farmers and ends with a cashier, but you're all involved in getting food and products to people that they may live and flourish. Without you, the chain falls down. You're loving people well by stacking those shelves that enables them to live and to eat and to care for their families. Your work is a means by which to love people. Maybe you enter data for an insurance company and the work is dull. But the data you enter is about people. That enables them to have insurance, that enables them to protect their house, that enables them to care for their family and provide shelter. You're loving people well by entering data well. And when you grasp that what you're doing is serving the King, living as his disciple through loving God and loving people, it changes your work. Because it might be, on one sense, the dullest job on earth. Yet through it you can worship, you can love, you can serve, you can grow, you can rejoice and even enjoy what you do because you serve the King. And you're loving him and you're loving people. And when we think like that, it guards against idleness. We're not going to be lazy. We'll strive to do our work well and serve the King and his people well. It guards us against idolatry because my work is now not about me, not about what I can get from it, but about worship of the true King. So now I'm concerned to be faithful and fruitful, not idle and idolatrous. I serve the King, not lowly officials. And how will I keep going? What will be the daily motivation, as it were? Well, our third and final proverb. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 14. I'm going to mention a couple more in this section, but chapter 12, verse 14 will be our primary one. And there Solomon says this. He says, look, from the fruit of their lips, people are filled with good things, and the work of their hand brings them reward. The work of their hand brings them reward. That's the third point. All good work brings reward. There is reward in work. As we saw in that first proverb, hard work brings profit. But what is the reward? Is it the paycheck, or is it something more? For many, work has become all about my satisfaction, my fulfillment, my pleasure. So you hear people say things like, I'll work hard when I find the job that gives me passion. Then I'll really strive when I'm in the right job. But now I'm just do what I have to do. I'll plod along, I'll pick up my paycheck. And Solomon writes elsewhere, Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11. You can see it just a few verses above. Those who work their land will have abundant food. Those who chase fantasies have no sense. So significant is the proverb. He repeats it in 28:19. He says again, those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies will have their fill of poverty. Those who chase the fantasy, who chase and hope for the great job, the great calling, the great fit, will often be disappointed and impoverished because it might not happen. The job you do might not be the job you dreamt of. And if you then allow work to become just about a paycheck, something I have to do until that great job comes along, you'll miss the true reward that hard work brings, especially as those who serve the King. See, the reward for hard work is not just a paycheck. It's not even the sense of being fulfilled or entitled to my dream job. No, the rewards are much greater. Those rewards then become the motivations, especially in the toil and frustration of work. So what is the rewards and the motivators for serving the King well? Well, there's a reward in and of itself in loving God and worship Him well in my workplace and pleasing Him and bringing Him pleasure and glorifying Him in many ways. Knowing that as I work well serving King Jesus, I'm loving Him and bringing honor and glory. There's a delight in doing that. That brings pleasure now. That is reward in and of itself. But how much more so when we hear on that last day, well done, good and faithful servant. If I love others well and through them do my job well, help to clothe people or clear away rubbish or help to play my part in ordering society and culture and being part of the means that God uses to provide for people. Martin Luther wrote, when we pray the Lord's Prayer, we ask God to give us this day our daily bread. And He does give us our daily bread. He does it by means of the farmer who planted and harvested the grain, the baker who made the flour into bread, and the person who prepared the meal. And as we love people, by serving King Jesus in our work well, be it as a surgeon, be it as a mum, God uses that to provide and to sustain culture and society and families, and God takes pleasure in well-ordered societies. He's glorified when we do our part to make that happen. When we give our time and ability to making and improving society, we're doing what God intended us to do. We're loving people. There's a goodness in that that's rewarding. And it's a satisfaction in knowing that what I'm doing is pleasing my Heavenly Father and my Heavenly King. And as we live in this way, as we live out as disciples of Jesus, working to please Him, we also reflect God's character in our workplaces. We're made in His image to be His representatives, to do what He does. In one way or another, your job will somehow involve the work of bringing beauty out of ugliness, order out of chaos. Unassembled pieces are pulled together to make a widget used to create a product that people use. Sickness is treated. Injustice is rectified. Data is entered. Broken windows are repaired. Children are taught and disciplined. And you're reflecting the very character of the God you serve. And when God created, He brought order to chaos and beauty to formless. He then turned and said it was good. So is your work when you do it in that frame. When you exercise authority over others, a manager or a policeman, and you do it justly and fairly with love and kindness and respect, you're reflecting the very character of God. As you live this way, you bring praise and honor to the God you reflect. There's a reward in that. And yes, there's the obvious reward of money. That's not insignificant. One of the main reasons we work is so we can provide for ourselves, for our families, those we love and others, so work so we can eat. Paul writes 2 Thessalonians 3:10, the one who's unwilling to work shall not eat. Solomon wrote, those who chase fantasies have no sense, they'll engage in poverty. And of course, part of the way our culture works is we're not just individualistic. We pay taxes to ensure those who cannot work because of health or legitimate reasons are also provided for. We provide for each, for our families and for others. Solomon also writes, Proverbs 24:27, put your outdoor work in order. Get your fields ready. After that, build your house. I.e., put the provision of your family before the comfort of your family. Note the order. Don't buy stuff, then work out how to pay it, struggling to meet ends meet each month. You provide, and then you worry about the comfort, the extras, as it were. But you see, there's a reward in providing for yourself and your family and for others. There's a satisfaction, there's an inherent goodness and value in that. And God in his kindness even allows the reward of enjoying our work. Whatever our work, if we're thinking about it rightly and we're seeing those greater purposes and we're seeking to serve King Jesus, work will still at times feel like toil. It'll be frustrating. That's part of God's punishment on us, on our fallen world. But in God's kindness, in his mercy, he also allows some measure of enjoyment of reward. I can even enjoy my work. And one day, all will enjoy their work all of the time. But for now, there'll be a measure of enjoyment. And often the reason we don't enjoy work is because we've either made our job our idol, we pine for work that will give us the deeper meaning and purpose we long for, or we've grown idle in our work because we've lost interest in doing what God has actually called us to do. And we've failed to see or grasp the purposes for which he has put us in our current situation. And we stop enjoying work as those who serve the King. Other rewards also might come. Colleagues are saved. We grow spiritually. The world might acknowledge your work with awards and gongs. But our ultimate sense of meaning and purpose and reward as Christians comes from knowing that everything we do is for Jesus' glory, which in turn should motivate us to work with all our heart wherever he has deployed us, seeing the rewards he generously pours out for us. Aligning your job with your passions is great. Personal career growth is a good thing. It's fine to pursue satisfaction in your work. But none of those things are the primary reason we work. We work to glorify Jesus no matter what we do because of what he has done on the cross for us. And we glorify him by loving him and worship him and loving others and reflecting his character, providing for our families and others. You serve the King as you work, and your ultimate reward is still to come. So for now, we work hard, we work smart, and we trust God. Take a moment while we rearrange the room. You may have lots of questions, then stack them up on Zoom or on the chat, and we'll start to engage with those. Give us 2 minutes whilst we switch things around.
Welcome, Jackie.
Everybody's got a very glum face tonight.
Are we broadcasting on YouTube as well, Sam? Is the YouTube broadcast? That's gone live. So we are totally ready to go again.
We're going, we're speaking. You're on.
Good to go.
We are on. Yes. Thank you, Ivy. We are definitely ready. If you could mute all apart from us, Sam, that would be great. Not that we need to mute everybody. We have quite a good laugh, me and Mark, sometimes in this, but can't do that now. Okay, thank you for that, Mark. Well, it's about work, as you know. So there's going to be an opportunity to ask you questions, to be asked questions, and that can be on Zoom or it can be in the room. So just kind of initial reaction. Anyone got any questions about work that were immediately kind of raised by what was said this evening about being a Christian and work? Was there anything that immediately struck you? Maybe something it's COVID related and work, or maybe it's something else. So if you're on Zoom, if you could put your hand up and Sam will find you, put your electronic hand up, the raise hand function, which moves you to the top, or if you're in the room and you want to ask a question,
Raise your literal hand.
you could raise your literal hand and that would be cool. Anything about work that observe, that you observe. I just heard someone whispering, I don't know where that was. Okay, that's good, that was all clear then. What are the joys of work for anybody? In the room, on the Zoom? Put your hand up. The joys of work for anybody? Those of you who work, do you have any joys?
Clearly not.
Is there any enjoyment in work? What do you think the joy of work should be, Mark?
All those things I said.
Yeah. Yes, Ian.
I think in my work, working with young people and the ability to make a difference both in their academic understanding and lives in the future. And it's always good when you hear from former students as to what they are doing and bits that they remember of particular lessons. And that's very satisfying.
Yeah, thank you. So that was Ian, just for the... Oh no,
Can we just check? Benefit. Can people at home hear those in the room speaking?
I shouldn't have thought so.
So. No, you can't.
No,
You might have to repeat.
I know.
Sorry.
I just assumed I had to.
Okay.
I was going to summarise though.
Sure, you carry on. Sorry.
Ian said yes. That's what he said. No, Ian, as a teacher, said it was the enjoyment of having an influence on people's lives, children's lives in particular, and then seeing them progress. So there's a joy in that.
Steve Mills.
Steve Mills, you raised a hand. You can make a comment.
Yeah, you were just saying, is there any joy in work? And I think sometimes we take on the world view that it is actually not enjoyable, when perhaps we should be thinking a bit more like we've been told tonight. So just an observation that we fall into the world's trap of work is a means to an end. And yeah, that's just an observation.
Thank you. Ali Whitley has messaged in saying colleagues and getting to know others. So the relationships at work she enjoys, which is a good one. And then Matthew, presumably this Matthew related to Ali, satisfaction of doing good. That's good. Anybody else? Those of you at school, children, what's good about your work? Anything good about your schoolwork? Is there any joy in your schoolwork? Say what it is, Violet. The social aspects of schoolwork are good. What about the production aspects of schoolwork? Pardon? Okay. I didn't hear, but doing art. I thought that's what she said, but I didn't think that was true. So I just thought I must have misheard. Doing art, yes, very good one. Excellent. Dave has his hand up.
I think so.
Dave and Sue, we'll unmute you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, this could be a bit of a rambling answer, so I'll try not to go on too long. I've been agonising whether to retire or not for many years now, and I've actually taken the decision, and it's a bit like stepping off a cliff because, you know, for most of us, we take paid employment, you know, from the age of, from possibly the age of 16, 17, 18, or post-university. So it's a large part of your life. And when you're at work full time, you tend to spend more time in the company of your work colleagues than you do with your own family. So when you decide not to work, it's quite a big decision. I know you didn't really mention retirement, but I think work is a very good thing, and we should all endeavour to do it to the best of our ability in whatever we do. And be thankful if we have got a job, especially now in the current economic climate. Anybody who's got a job, certainly in our church, should be really grateful for it.
Yeah, and I think it's always worth remembering that the distinction between paid work and other work is not really there in the, it's not there so strongly in the Bible, in that obviously there was pay, because there's parables that Jesus has about people who get paid for working in the vineyard and so on. So there's the idea of payment for employment, but a very strict sort of distinction. And the whole kind of idea of the industrial or post-industrial society of 9 to 5 working is not there so strongly. You've got lots of people who were working in the fields or working as carpenters and whatever, and there wasn't a strict, well, we start at 9 and we stop at 5. There was kind of an overlap, and then there was keeping your family was part of your work as well. So we haven't got time to talk about retirement so much, but in retirement, you don't cease working, you just cease paid employment. There's still lots of work to do, which is worth thinking about.
Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, thank you. So you've got lots of work to do, Dave. And you do work, in terms of supporting your children and, adult children and grandchildren, and you've still got jobs to do around the house. And all those kind of things, which are part of work. Did you want to add something to that, Mark?
No, just what you said, really. I think in this context, all those principles still apply to retirement.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting point, because I'm really guilty of not always wanting to do housework. Well, hoovering I'm all right with, but housework as in, decoration jobs and all those sort of things. And it's always challenging to think, well, those are part of caring for my family, doing something beautiful. All those things you were saying.
Ordering chaos.
Yeah, ordering chaos. Yeah, actually tidying up even is part of work and has a dignity to it. So that's helpful to me to think about that.
Claudia adds as well, serving others and developing relationships with people. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're all into the relational. Trials and challenges of work. Anybody? Zooming, messaging me or Mark is fine.
Or messaging. I better get my phone.
Messaging on YouTube. I can see the messages on YouTube as well. If you want to message on YouTube.
No one messages me, so it's all right.
Trials, challenges of work.
No trials at work or challenges in the UK scene.
Sam, are you sure the stream's working okay? You are? Doesn't seem to be working. Okay, it might be my phone that's stuck in the... Finding balance, says Katura, a chat that's just appeared. Matthew Whitley just said, it's fine. So it's obviously my phone that's not getting it, but I'm getting the chats anyway. The challenge from Neil, it's Katura, but it's Neil writing it, is finding a balance. I presume she means a balance between working and not working, or perhaps a balance within the work, but probably between work. It's a weird thing, isn't it, work-life balance? It's not really a very biblical idea, I don't think. Is it?
I think this is where the whole area of thinking, seeing work as part of my discipleship helps me to see everything in that light, and there'll be times where I prioritize on one or the other depending on what is needed. So we often, in terms of balancing, in terms of leadership conversation, we talk about the lily pad effect. There are different lily pads and they float in and out. And sometimes work floats in a lot more and more pressing and family pushes out, and other times family comes more pressing and work comes out a bit, rather than kind of a hierarchical point. But I think it's always probably one that will come up through their discussions in Proverbs on the balanced life.
Yeah. Other trials, challenges in work? Yeah, Emily.
I think working underneath a boss that you might not agree with, or to listen to their ways of telling you to do something that might not agree with you believe, or things like that.
Yeah, working for a difficult boss. Excellent one. Do you want to answer that in the light of 1 Peter as well, Mark?
You submit, don't we? But we do so knowing that actually we may suffer for doing what is right in that context, and
Yeah.
knowing there are times when actually it is hard. But I think this is the context. And this is also, it's not separating out that actually through that engagement, as I seek to submit to that boss who is difficult and who I'm going to honor, is also thinking about actually this is the means by which Jesus has put me there for a reason, that this isn't wasted. This is a part of his way of growing me as a believer as well. So this is part of his sanctification work for me, and actually I honor him well in the way in which I love that difficult boss and submit to him as I can. And actually that just helps change it. So it's not a kind of grin and bear it, because although this boss may be unbearable, I'm serving a king who loves me deeply, and he's called me to this particular hard trial at this time, but he will also give me the help and the grace and the mercy I need to endure it and to do it right.
Yeah. So what do you think about getting out of a job like that? So you're in a job that's misery for you every day because of the difficult boss or difficult relationships. So as a Christian, should you be trying to get out of that job? Resolutely saying, I'm going to stay, whatever. What should you be doing?
Well, I don't think there's it's not a sin to want to leave that job, is it?
No.
So it's a wisdom, and I think the wisdom, therefore, is part of where we're seeking to discern what is right and good by Christ, what he's calling me. So I think the general principle seems to me you stay until there's a reason to move, and I think when you're looking for other work, you've got to start going, okay, is there another work where I can honor and glorify Christ? Is this work good and helpful and benefit? Will it help me in my worship of Christ? In other words, if this job I'm going to then suddenly take is going to mean that actually I'm going to work every hour under the sun and I can't get to church on a Sunday or be part of a small group or be around to disciple my family, then there are all those questions.
Yeah.
So I think there are some questions you want to ask, but it's not necessarily just always immediately running because it's difficult. Sometimes I stay where it is and actually things change because of the way in which I respond. But I think we just got to ask those reflective questions, because it may be that the Lord is. And of course, the other option is there opportunity to move? There may not be.
No.
Therefore, it may just be that the Lord is calling me to stay where I am.
Yeah. I think in 1 Corinthians it talks about people staying in the situation. It's talking about widows,
7,
not
yeah.
widows, about wives, basically. And it's saying kind of remain in the situation. But it just mentions slaves in passing, I think, which is, if you're a slave, remain as a slave. But if you get the opportunity to get your freedom, then take it, kind of thing. And I always took that as a sort of basically be contented where you are.
Yeah.
But if you get the right opportunity to move, it's okay. Like a slave, it was fine to move out of slavery. But while they're in slavery, they're contented while they're there. And I think that's the principle.
You stay until there's a good reason to move. The good reason may be a better opportunity arises, but you still want to take in all those other factors as you're thinking about work. Is this going to enable me to worship Christ? Is this going to enable me to have the freedom to keep working in my discipleship? Is this going to, I think all those other factors, because just because an opportunity arises, but actually the opportunity may not be the best opportunity. I think that's where talking with others and those freedoms as well. I think our culture is very much more about we're entitled to a better job. I'm entitled to get promoted. I'm entitled to all of these things. And I think the gospel calls me to reflect in different ways about those things.
Ali Whitley says, in terms of trials, thoughts, how much time to put into career progression, not necessarily for the sake of progression, but because you're interested in the challenge or the development of work. So how much time should you put into career progression? Should you put any time into career progression? What do you think?
Well, I don't think, it's not a wrong thing to want to progress a career, but I think you keep coming back to those other questions that will help you develop that. What are my other responsibilities? How does it balance that out? Will I be able to, if I progress too far, will this restrain my Christian life? Will it constrain my discipleship of my family? Will it cause other pressures on me that will actually cause me to stumble or fall? So in other words, there could be, converse that with the Proverbs of the king, there is a sense of honing one's skills and developing and doing the best I can. So in one sense, it may well be that actually you're particularly gifted, you're particularly good at the job, and to progress further is the way in which you're honoring Christ. But you're always holding those things in tension, because just because you can doesn't mean you should. At the same time, there's arguments both ways. So I think this is where it's thinking it in this wider framework. Ultimately, this is the area where Jesus has called me to work out my discipleship and serve him as my king. That's my ultimate goal. How does that then work out? It's not just, this is my career, I want to do as much as I can and get as much as I can from it. It's more, how does this enable me to serve Jesus best?
Yeah. And I think striving for excellence is always good. And if through doing that we get promotions or more opportunities, I think balancing those things that you're just talking about, it's very legitimate and positive to take them. I think the technique of saying, I want to get up the ladder, so I'm going to do this, as a sort of means to an end. The progression is the end you're aiming for, rather than excellence. I think that's where it tips over as well. So a bit like implied in Ali's question, if you're progressing because you love the work, you want to be excellent at the work, you want to grow the work, as it were, make it better, make the thing you're doing better. I mean, she's in health service administration, finance and stuff, so make the systems better, make the health service work better. That's a good idea. If you think, I want to get to a point where I'm, chief executive of, I'm sure she doesn't, chief executive of, Brighton and Sussex Health Trust or whatever. If that's your goal, then that probably has become an idol, a wrong goal. If your goal is just to be excellent and you land in the job, then you think, can I do this job? Well, maybe I can.
Potential, though, converse, you might think, I want to be chief executive in order to re-establish things, do things better, do things well, and I have the gifts to do so, and I believe that's the calling that Christ has.
That's true.
But I guess sometimes it's more about, I want the position, the status, and therefore it becomes much more of an idol than it does about... And this is where these things, it's wisdom, which is why Proverbs is a great book, isn't it? Because it's about ultimately fear of God and living wisely before him, rather than allowing the world to set the agenda. The world would say you do whatever you can to get ahead. You stuff people, you walk over them if that enables you to get ahead. Whereas the wisdom always talks much more about serving and fearing God, fearing the King and who I serve.
I think, and it's related to the proverb a little bit, that generally, actually excellence does get acknowledged in the end. If you're good at your work, it does tend to be noticed. There are injustices in work, and people who by technique sort of advance, and people who miss what you do and everything else. But I think sort of in the main, excellent work gets recognised and gets promoted.
But I may choose for other reasons not to. So I may be asked to be promoted. I may up the ladder, but actually I realise by going up the ladder, it means it's going to be more time away from family. So the season's not right. Kids are at home. I want to get back. I want to make sure that I'm able to disciple them, that I have energy to invest in them. So the season is not right for me to progress. So you defer for 10 years or whatever it is. That's true, not men and women in terms of different reasons.
Yeah. I agree with all that. I think there's a but coming. The work-life balance is a hard thing to wisely work through, because I totally agree with you that there are jobs you could take which would compromise your family, but how much is too much and how much is enough, as it were? So how much is too much work? How much is not enough time with your family? These are wisdom issues rather than mathematical precise issues. If you say, I should be able to see my children for 2 hours every day, is that right? Or should I just see them for an hour? Or should I be happy that I can't, as a working man, see them at all sometimes during the week, and I can only see them at weekends? I don't think there's a simple answer that says the right balance is X. No. I think it depends on a lot of factors, what your weekends are like, what your character's like, what your children are like, what the challenges at home are like, if you're the working wife, you're the working husband, how you can work all that. So I think there's lots of things to factor in, rather than just saying, I need enough time with my children, because otherwise you're still left with the question, how much is enough?
Sure.
Which I think is
worth
weighing up.
But it's the starting point of thinking.
Yes.
How the starting point is not, I need to progress my career, I'm going to do whatever. The starting point is, how do I think about this from a gospel point of view, that actually my priority is much more concerned with people and particularly priority of, at that point, my family. So that's going to work itself out. Then I have to be honest with myself. My own character may be that I actually flogging myself for 10 hours just isn't good for me. I can't handle that.
Yeah.
For others, flogging themselves for 10 hours is not an issue. They still then have capacity to come home, to be engaged with their family.
Yeah.
For someone else, that's just not going to be the
Yeah.
case, or it wipes them out. And then what we have to make sure is that, talking about this the other weekend, is it's not this kind of hierarchy where we start judging one another.
Yeah.
We just recognize there's a reality of difference between people, between their capacities, between the decisions they'll make as they seek to live for Christ. And we've got to speak into one another on that, because actually I can be blind to it, and I'm proud, and lots of other reasons. So that's why we want one another to speak into and help one another in these difficult issues. But we also recognize there's just going to be difference. That's okay.
Yeah.
And we've got to recognize there's going to be differences of capacities, there's going to be differences of how we operate. And, you know, in one sense, living before the fear of the Lord and recognizing it's Him I serve. Can I stand before King Jesus and say, yeah, I have done as best as I can, sought to work hard, be faithful, being fruitful when I can, not being idolatrous, not being idle. And I think that's often the boundary, is that at the end of the day, the standard is, am I firstly being faithful, and then have I the capacity to do fruitfulness at this time without tipping into idolatry, but being faithful, it means I don't tip into being idle.
Anyone in the room or online want to ask or make a point about trials in terms of this sort of lockdown period? Because I think that's been quite challenging in terms of work.
Dave is waving at us and raised hands, and
Dave Andrews
Dave Andrews, yeah.
wants to come back again. Or repeat. Go for it, Sam.
Yeah, sorry. On the previous point, I think when I look back on my working life, particularly since I became a Christian, is a certain regret in not being able to share the gospel with colleagues or even customers. I have on occasion, and it's been reasonably okay, but I suppose you have to bear in mind that if you're working for some organisation, which clearly isn't a Christian organisation, you have to decide where the boundary is, and you have to be very sensitive. And I've had a few issues with people over the years, but I think probably I've not spoken to people sometimes when I wished I had. So, yeah, I don't know what you feel about that.
I don't have any feelings on whether you spoke enough, but
I mean,
I think I think in general it's a really difficult balance where, as we would speak up about many things in life, we need to speak up about our faith because it's really important. I'm sure there are times when overzealous evangelists have misused company time and not kind of respected the boundaries, but that's a judgment. But
My hunch is that for many of us, the reality is that I often hide behind the sense of this is work, I shouldn't talk about my Christian faith.
yes,
Much more to legitimize my lack of courage and
yeah, and I'm sure
faith.
that's true.
It's probably more tilted that way
Yeah.
than it is that we're overzealous and we're going to get in trouble for talking about Jesus.
Yeah,
In one sense, there is a sense whereby, being told to comment down about Jesus, wouldn't be the end of the world. One thing.
No, I think that's true. That's why I said, we would talk about everything else.
Yeah.
So, talk about football and other things we're interested in. We've got about 5 more minutes. And anything kind of COVID related? I would have thought work and COVID have been quite difficult. Working out whether you're...
Do you know what, I'm sorry, we haven't had any questions on talking about the real big issues in our workplaces right now. Because I think some of the tensions for work is how do you become a disciple in a culture where the work is pushing particular agendas at the moment.
Yeah.
LGBT agenda,
Sort of
transgender.
Emily's question, I guess, a little bit. Wish we didn't answer that bit of it. When they might be pushing something that was not that just they're a bad boss, that they're also pushing something that's maybe asking us to do something that...
Oh, I didn't hear that bit. Otherwise, I would have...
There was that little bit in the question, wasn't there? Yeah, there was a little bit in there. Yeah, Will was listening. He was listening intently too. Yeah. And I think,
speaking what you want.
again, it maybe more so, there's wisdom needed. There are things that in good conscience we can't do. And so if we're asked to do them by our boss, we can't do them because we think they're sinning or causing others to sin. I think there are other times when there's a culture and procedures and things that we're just very uncomfortable with, and I think that's slightly different. And if we kind of left every organisation where we weren't happy with some things in their culture or procedures, then there would be not many companies we could work for. So yeah, I think Ian wanted to make a contribution on that.
It's not the point you made, Graham, so it's taking you.
No, you're right.
But I think both of you have changed careers.
Yes.
What advice would you give to someone who's in a job and they're thinking, well, is this actually what I should be doing for the rest of my life? I'm maybe not feeling that I'm using the skills and abilities that I've got before. What advice would you offer to those of us that have 40 years of your life you spend in a job? How do you make sure that you're doing the right job for that period of time?
If you could answer that, there's a couple of other questions coming. Answer that and I'll answer it in a sec.
Okay.
It's an easy
I'll answer it.
question.
So the question is, how do you advise for those who are in a job, thinking about whether this is the job you should continue with, this is where the passion is or the desire, in effect? I think the legitimate questions to ask, and I think you then have to start to ask the question of why and what it is. So actually, sometimes I think partly this is what I was trying to get, we miss the value of what we're actually doing and the real context of what is involved already and how we're loving people and using the skills and the gifts that the Lord has given us in that particular role. But I think if there is something that we're particularly passionate about, then I think we need to be talking with others who can speak into that and help us to discern whether this is something that the Lord is calling me to do over here, wherever that might be. Does that kind of fit with who I am, the gifts I am, the season of life that I'm in, how others view me, the opportunities are obvious. So I think there's just a number of questions that you would want to prayerfully answer in that to weigh it. I don't think it's a case of I'm stuck in a job over here and I shouldn't ever think about moving job or calling me out. I think if I sense the Lord is calling me to something, then the wisdom says I pray about it and then I start to talk to others who speak into my life and know me, who can then weigh whether those things are whatever that is, whether I'm moving from one particular job. I mean, you had a big career change from prison to schools, so...
Working in the prison service rather than being in prison.
Yes, I'm glad you clarified that.
Well, you just said prison.
Sure,
Could have been anything.
I don't think anyone thought you worked in prison or that Ian was in prison for that reason, but yeah, fair enough. Good clarification, helpful for those who don't know.
It was fun anyway.
Yeah, no.
In God's goodness, I think I only ever applied for 2 jobs in my life. And one was when I was 16, one was when I was 28. So I know this might sound a bit fanciful, but I think if you're working well, opportunities just come along. That was my experience. So you were saying, you worked in other jobs, now you're working. I didn't highly seek the various career things that I had. People just said, do you want to come do this? And I stumbled into most things. And I obviously, people do have to apply for jobs and everything else. That's the normal way of things. But I think there is a degree of Christians being more opportunistic, as in looking for opportunities, just finding opportunities, waiting for opportunities, rather than being really forceful about this is what I want to do with my life, and then weighing those opportunities when they come along. I was in a particular job, came to this church, and had more opportunities to serve here. And people sometimes have said to me since, things like, oh, now you're doing something you really love. And I say, no, it's not about me. I loved doing the other work. And I loved working in a garden nursery. I loved working as an engineering apprentice. I loved running a company. I loved doing this. They were all aspects of worship. And this isn't the career I've always longed for. This is something I'm called to do now. And I think whether you end up in Christian work or anything else, I think you have to have the attitude of all the different stages are good, and it's not about you having some plan for your life. I think it's just about trying to be contented where you are, but take opportunities when they come along. Does that make sense, or was that too?
No, it makes sense. I mean, my experience was very different, but
yeah.
Yeah.
Good job. Yeah, you wanted to get out of your job.
No, I didn't want to get out of my job, but conversely, I always had a sense that I would be in ministry from quite a young age. So
Yeah.
the wisdom was then that not to go from university straight into ministry, but to go to work. And actually, I was very grateful that I did. And actually, in the work, I didn't ever want to run because I hated the work. So I was in the work, I enjoyed the work, delighted in the work, and then the
Yeah.
opportunity came to go into ministry. But my experience was that I always sensed that was the direction of travel.
Yeah, to be fair, so did I. But I suppose my point was that it wasn't something I had to do, if you know what I mean, to be all right. Or it wasn't, here's a strategy, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and then I'm going to do this. Maybe that's okay to do, I don't know. But that wasn't what I did. And I think it chimes with what you were saying about being contented with where you are, but looking for opportunities where they come. I don't know if that answered that question at all. The question that Linda asked on the YouTube chat, so many different chats going on, was, does home working present different challenges to us? Or is it any different? I think was what she basically said. Is honouring God different for those who find themselves now working at home? I guess meaning doing the same job but working it from home. Any observations on that?
I don't think it changes what we do fundamentally. I think actually the danger of idleness becomes a challenge because I think it's easier to get distracted. So I think it involves a different discipline. I think how I love colleagues potentially needs a bit more thought in terms of intentionality, in terms of phoning up maybe or in contacting them. But I think the same principles apply across that line.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the social aspects of work, which some of you mentioned, which I think are right because we're created as social beings, I think we will miss those social aspects, or at least some of them. Some of them we won't miss. But I think if we're in a position of influence, trying to create those is worthwhile. And I think people working in isolation is not entirely healthy. So yeah, I think that's worth thinking about. But I think in the meantime, while people are, for their own health or procedures in their own companies need to work at home, I think the challenge is exactly what you said. Trying as best you can to honour God. And I think it's much more difficult if you've got families. Really interesting Radio 5 phone-in, which was, in short, all of those who didn't have families, young families at home, loved home working, thought, I'm never going to go back to working in an office. All of those that had children at home, particularly younger children at home, this is a nightmare, I can't wait to get back to the office. That was basically the the polarization in. Because I think there's just different challenges with children, and yeah, lots of people have been thrown into that without any planning or any plan, basically.
Good note to finish on.
Yeah, that's a bit of a negative note to finish on. There was another question that came from Simon Haley. Says it might be helpful to how you manage working from home, as in you and I, and then discipline from that, from those who've been facing it.
The difficult for both of us is that we've worked from home for a number of years now, so actually working from home during COVID has not been particularly different in that sense, apart from having the children at home, which has meant that just one has to be a little bit more extra disciplined in terms of working. But I think making sure that one has structure, making sure that one has set times and focus. I think all the little tricks of productivity are planning out your day, ensuring that you have, even if you get distracted, things on your computer that keep you from the distractions, that you can program stuff that stops you looking at websites, as in sports websites and stuff like that, which will distract you from your work. Doing deep work, in other words, keeping the concentration levels on. So I think all of those things are just discipline structures that one has to put in place when you're working at home and working on your own. But of course, then making sure that meetings and all those kind of things are happening in the right way as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think good family dialogue about expectations, I think, is important when you're working at home. So understanding if you're in a marriage and you've got children, talking with the children, talking with your spouse about, okay, this is what I need to do, and so we need to work for me to be able to do this, and for your your wife and your children, or your husband and your children, to understand these are the parameters.
Yeah.
And in order to be honouring to my work, I need to do this. And there needs to be flexibility too, because there's stuff just happens, particularly when you've got young children in the home, and so there is flexibility in home working. That's one of the joys of it. But you either need, I think, to be highly disciplined, or you need to be very dynamic and really think carefully about, okay, so I'm letting myself do this now, but that does have a payoff, and I need to recognise that. So I'm going to mow the lawns now. I'm going to do this now because it stopped raining, but there is a payoff, and I need to recognise that. So when I'm supposed to be, making dinner, it means I'm not, not that I'm making dinner very often, everybody, but there's a payoff. So you need to weigh that, and I think, like you were saying about characters earlier, some of us are more structured, some of us can be dynamic, but you kind of can't be both at the same time. You have to say, I'm dynamic, but this is going to be quite painful because I'm going to be kind of product-based, as in there's things I need to do. So it's not about the time, it's about production. That's fine, but you need to realise you might be working very late into the evening because of that, because you made choices through the day. And you can't say, well, I'm highly structured and I'm very dynamic, because then you end up doing nothing. So yeah, that's worth thinking about. There was just one about students, if we could just squeeze in. Sorry, we're supposed to stop at 7:30, but there was quite a lot of questions kind of flooded in at the end. Sarah McQuaker basically saying, if you're just working for grades, what does that mean in terms of work? As in, what's the point? What's the meaning of that? How does that connect with your work ethic point?
Well, because that's the arena that the Lord has called you to at this point. So that is the arena where you seek to do the best you can for Christ as you do that, recognizing that actually in our system, that is the means by which, by doing your best, gives you the most opportunities and options that allow you to then carry on in the arena wherever the Lord has called you, whatever he's placed you into doing.
So people should strive, children should strive for good grades.
Absolutely.
Is there any danger in that? Is there still the same dangers of idleness and idolatry in grades?
I can become an idolater, I become a perfectionist, and I can become most concerned and driven about the worship of my grades because it attaches to my identity, but that's different from seeking to be faithful and fruitful. So again, the same dangers. I can go the other way and become idle, do nothing, or I become idolatrous and I think I can become a perfectionist, or that the grades become everything and define me. But actually, I'm still called to be faithful, to do the best I can, and where I can, fruitful, as in better than I can, developing myself, taking on extra challenges.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody out there in here. We're going to stop in just a moment. We're actually going to take a pause from Proverbs and from Q&A-ing for a few weeks, maybe 5 or 6.
Till September.
Till September, in fact, however many weeks that is, however many Sundays. And so we're going to preach through some Psalms. I can't remember the criteria in which I picked them, but anyway, there was...
I think Messianic, are they?
Messianic Psalms, I think they are. Yes, they are Messianic Psalms, that's right. I was getting muddled with Songs of Ascents. So Psalms coming up on Sunday evenings for the next few Sundays, and a glittering array of guest preachers.
Starting with Nick McQuaker next week.
Yes, he's the first glitterer. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you for joining us on Zoom. I think because we're going to do Psalms next week, we're just going to do straight YouTube all the way through, just so you can get yourself aligned for that. You don't have to worry about the stress of going across to YouTube. But thank you for joining us, everybody. I'm going to close in prayer now. I know it's a bit tedious, but it's the same protocol in that you have to go out this door and depart. And I know there's a temptation to bunch, even though there's a relatively small number of you, and start chatting at very close proximity. But I just encourage you not to do that. Those of you who are in your own household, you can get as close as you like. So I'm looking there, but I should be looking there. Let's pray and close. Gracious Father, we thank you for the privilege of working in your world for your glory. Thank you so much for that reminder this evening about the privilege and the joy and the profit. And we pray that you'd help us to avoid the idleness or the idolatry, and that we would work hard for your glory to make things better, striving for excellence, realizing our place in the world, and that as we do that, we would rejoice to be serving you and others in that way. Help us as we part now. We commit ourselves to you now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for coming. Any feedback on Sunday evenings would be great from those of you who are here.
Zoom will be finishing.
Yeah.